Introduction to Enoch and His Books. Silence, Interpretation, and Enduring Legacy. Enoch in the silence of Scripture. Few figures in the Bible are as quietly intriguing as Enoch. He appears only briefly in the early chapters of Genesis. Listed among generations of long-lived ancestors, yet his story breaks the pattern in a striking way. While others are described as living, fathering children, and dying, Enoch is said to have walked with God. Then he was no more, because God took him. The text offers no explanation and moves on, leaving readers to pause where the narrative does not. This brevity has long prompted questions. How can someone associated with such an unusual fate receive so little attention? The answer begins with understanding how the biblical text itself works. The genealogies of Genesis were not intended as biographies. Their purpose was to establish lineage, continuity, and theological order rather than to tell detailed life stories. Within this literary framework, brevity does not imply insignificance. On the contrary, a departure from the usual pattern, such as Enoch's, often signals that something important is being conveyed with deliberate restraint. To walk with God is a phrase rich in meaning, suggesting an ongoing relationship marked by faithfulness and alignment with the divine will, yet Scripture leaves the phrase unexplained, inviting reflection rather than providing commentary. Enoch's story, told in only a few words, functions less as a complete account and more as a marker, pointing toward themes of righteousness, intimacy with God, and the possibility of life defined by something other than its end. In later centuries, Jewish and Christian communities returned to this brief biblical portrait and sought to understand it more fully. A variety of writings emerged that reflected on Enoch's character, his role, and his significance. These texts, often referred to as extra-biblical, do not replace a correct scripture. Instead, they represent how later readers engaged with a figure who already carried theological weight, using the language and concerns of their own time to explore questions the biblical text leaves open. This book approaches Enoch with that perspective in mind. It does not begin with the assumption that anything was hidden, removed, or suppressed. Rather, it recognizes that religious traditions develop through interpretation as well as preservation, and that different texts serve different purposes. The canonical scriptures provide the foundation, while later writings offer insight into how Enoch was understood, remembered, and taught across generations. The aim of this study is threefold. First, it examines what the Bible actually says about Enoch, paying close attention to language, structure, and context. Second, it explores how later Jewish and Christian traditions interpret Enoch, and why those interpretations took the forms they did. Third, it offers readers a clear framework for distinguishing between biblical text, interpretive tradition, and later theological reflection without blurring their differences. The scope of the book is intentionally balanced. Extra-biblical writings are neither dismissed nor treated as equal in authority to Scripture for all readers. Instead, they are approached as historical and theological witnesses that help illuminate how ancient communities thought about righteousness, divine order, and humanity's place between heaven and earth. In this sense, the silence surrounding Enoch is not a gap to be filled with speculation, but an invitation to careful reading. By attending closely to what is said, what is left unsaid, and how later generations responded, we gain a clearer understanding not only of Enoch himself, but of the world of ideas in which his story continued to matter.